That's a good loop shaping.
So just as a review, we kind of ended up last week, I finished, but just as a review, I finished with Locke and Kant, Immanuel Kant and John Locke, primarily because we inherited their philosophy in America. John Locke, of course, Thomas Jefferson's all embedded in all of our documents. Immanuel Kant was the one who looked at Locke and Spinoza and said, you know, they disagree on whether there's a person or God or not, but they both agree that compassion and empathy is the heart of what virtue is. Of course, so did Schopenhauer. And Immanuel Kant came up with a great conclusion, which Schopenhauer agreed with, that reason couldn't help you finish that question. The reason was like a necessary condition, but it wasn't sufficient to define morality. So he left it open. And of course, he left it open, and some people want the United States way with pragmatism, psychology, positivism, utilitarianism, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. By the way, that was used to justify slavery in the United States. The greatest happiness for the Southerners was to have some people slaves. So there's arguments pro and con, and these two philosophies became known as the philosophy of the good, which kind of went the way of us, pragmatism in the United States, greatest happiness for the greatest number, and the philosophy of the right, which would be duty, honor your promises, do what's right, do your job, type of deal. And those two philosophies basically conflict in some ways. They conflict with each other, and so we have to balance, go back and forth. So where did that leave us? Well, I'm skipping a whole bunch of stuff, but if you go into World War I, if you go towards World War I, nobody predicted the catastrophe that World War I was. Nobody. And the Armenian genocide was the first use of the word genocide by the Turks around 1910 or so, right around the World War I time frame. Then, of course, between the wars, you had depression, and then you had nuclear. Then you had the Holocaust, World War II. Unbelievable, where in the name of morality, to purify a race, you kill off a whole culture, and no matter where they're located. And that was done in the name of morality. If you read enough about the Third Reich and Hitler, you realize that they thought they were doing a moral thing based on reason. Okay? So you can kind of see a misreading of Nietzsche there, a misreading of what Nietzsche had tried to say 50 or 60 years earlier. Hitler had a bust of Nietzsche in his study, and he quoted him all the time. Nietzsche like Wagner, so did Hitler. And he used his quotes to purify. Most people who teach Nietzsche teach out of Zarathustra, which is kind of, Nietzsche was going crazy a little bit. He couldn't see very well, so he got a rodent apron. But if you read his genealogy of morals, that's where it'll terrify you. You can see Mein Kampf in the genealogy of morals, the way he speaks. So that was one way. One reason went. The other reason went, of course, the Russian way with atheism. And at the end of World War II, they dropped the Tsar bomb, or they inherited the Byzantines. The Tsar bomb would have destroyed an area instantly from Anaheim to Los Angeles, just wiped it out. It's 50 megatons. The shockwave went 3 times around the world. And you go on the YouTube, watch it. They almost killed the pilot that dropped it. They couldn't get out of the way fast enough. So after they dropped that, people started saying, oh, what are we doing? What's going on? And then they questioned our own dropping of the bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It turned out that the engineers only worked on that. A guy named Brewster, a very talented engineer, only worked on it because he got a letter from Roosevelt saying we would only drop a demonstration bomb. We would not drop it on the city first. Well, Roosevelt died. And either Truman wasn't told about that bomb by Stinson, or Stinson ignored it, or Truman ignored it. We don't know. But the engineers were very furious, and they started writing letters. It's interesting that the complaints came from engineers. But the scientists, on the other hand, if you look at some of the scientists' quotes, at the end of my paper, mathematics professor Bridgman, that scientists should mind their own professional business. Isidore Rabi from MIT said, the social responsibility of science was to do good science, period. Oppenheimer said, there should be no moral prohibitions against scientific work. Right. So this is another reason-based philosophy that's kind of gone amok even in our own culture. It's very interesting that the people we dropped the Nagasaki bomb on, where that bomb hit, was a church. It was the last remnants of the Christians who were wiped out in the Shimabara rebellion about 200 years earlier. But a remnant secretly practiced Christianity, and the bomb was dropped right on their church. And they have rebuilt that church now, and it's there in Nagasaki where the bomb was dropped. And it's a token of forgiveness for the people who dropped the bomb, which I guess is us. So it's kind of interesting that nobody even knew there was Christians there. They had been hiding under the Shogun rule for 300 years. So today, what do we have? Synthetic biology. Synthetic biology. Clinton, in his wisdom, which I see, he would not let people patent the human gene. He let it go out there. Which you think, well, that's a good thing. I thought that was a good thing when he did that, right? Now everybody has the human gene. Everybody. So all these labs are creating synthetic life forms by downloading the human genome, and they're creating viruses to attack that life form. And they're doing it like with 3M printers instead of using biology. They're creating life forms. They're actually creating the H1N1 virus now with no antidote, no known antidote. And there's no known control over them doing it. All you got to do is be smart enough to download this stuff off the internet. They're creating the Spanish flu virus without an antidote, and the Spanish flu virus killed more people in World War I than World War I did. My mother lost her sister in that Spanish flu virus. You probably, I don't know if you're following the news, but you know, when Obama, of all people, signed a defense agreement that says he can target you, all the government has to do is say you're an enemy of the state, and they can target you, right? Well, is there a check on that? No. It's done. All internal government committees do it, right? And if you follow some of the right-wing people are objecting to that. I mean, what are we fighting for if we can be targeted without our own knowledge, without defense, just being declared an enemy of the state? Now, I don't think Obama's going to misuse that privilege, but I'm not sure the next guy is going to honor it. So in this is synthetic biology. How about automatic warfare, right? Isaac Asimov said the first rule of warfare is don't harm a human being. And we already got drones. The Army is already building armed robots to go into conflict and autonomously decide whether or not to shoot. Our professors here at Cal Poly are working on the ethics for that decision to be made autonomously. Bush Gilly, he died last year. He and 4 other engineers, summer of whenever the Challenger occurred, 80-something, was it 87? When the Challenger exploded with the teacher on board, when Reagan was president? 1985. Whenever that was. It's from the summer to January. They were writing letters to NASA management and to the government and to their company, Morton Liafagol, that the space shuttle was dangerous, was going to blow up. He was certain it was going to blow up when it took off. Right? The engineers could not get through. They could not break through. You know, and when they finally decided to launch, he and the engineers called management and what they called a meeting, emergency meeting immediately, and they were shut down by higher powers because Reagan was going on TV that night and he wanted to announce that there was a teacher at the time. So I just wanted to mention he died last year, and he had PTSD. He and the other engineers got PTSD from that, and it was because the guilt that they couldn't break through. Now we might say, well, you know, you did your best, and they think they know they didn't do their best because they knew it was going to blow up and they couldn't stop it. So this is the price we pay for not caring about what decisions are made at higher levels. One of my last things I did in the Air Force was I was an independent review team. Before they have a first flight of an airplane, they have an independent review team. You get to pick your own engineers. So I picked about 30 engineers from Wright-Patterson, and we went out to Edwards, St. Louis. We went all over, and we evaluated the first flight of the F-15, low level. And I had done it for the F-16, and we said it was okay, but the F-15 wasn't okay. So my engineers, the engineers that I had on the team, did not like it, so I backed them up. Next thing I know, I'm in front of a 3-star general, and he's saying, you know, what are you doing? I said, well, the switch in the back, I won't go into details, but there was a switch in the back we thought could be dangerous. I said, they need to fix that. And he said, they threw me out of his, actually, General Lowe almost physically threw me out of his office. Next thing I know, I'm in front of Fred Rawl, who was the chief civilian in the headquarters building, and Fred says, he says, you know, Dan, he says, we have never stopped the first flight. in his office, ever. And I told him, I said, Fred, it's always the first time. They fixed it. They fixed the switch. But we were not going to let, and I had the backing of all the engineers. It wasn't like the engineers weren't sure. It was because that program was so valuable to the company, McDonnell Douglas.
The Cirrus aircraft with not taking the not taking like the parachutes out because they couldn't pass safety specs without them.
Yeah. And
marketing it as a safety feature.
Yeah. It's really just a psychological feature, right? It's something to do before you get killed. Is to play with that parachute. It's not going to save you. You're still coming down 20 feet per second.
You pull the thing, and then you're just screwed.
Yeah. You kill more people with the safety feature than you do without it. Yeah. C-17. I was involved in the C-17 development, and we had to decide what kind of wire to put in the airplane. This is another project when I was in Air Force, and again, I was on the ERT team. I went out with an ERT team, and it was capped-on wiring. They had capped-on wiring, which catch on fire. It already had destroyed a Swiss airliner. It catches on fire, and the capped-on insulation is like a fuse. So you light it's like a fuse. It goes, and all the wire in the airplane goes shh. And we're deciding whether to put capped-on wiring into the C-17. A no-brainer, right? Don't do it. 50 pounds. It costs 50 pounds to put a non-flammable wiring installation. That was the cost. 50 pounds. It was 50 pounds heavier. But the weight was such a driver in that C-17 that they actually put capped-on wiring in it. So if that C-17 ever takes a hit, a bullet hit, and it hits the wiring, but we fought that battle tooth and nail when I was at Wright-Patterson, and we lost. So I said, no, give us the answer. The last answer I think that came to me was, find me an installation so it's on the C-17. While the Navy is taking off all their capped-on wiring of all their airplanes, we are building one, putting it in. Now you tell me that makes sense.